Hey guys, welcome back to Brass Lab. Today we're going to be talking about Glock and why, even in 2025, it's still perfection. So, ever since I've been a gun guy, I've always looked at Glocks with kind of like a sort of calm reverence because of its reputation for reliability. However, I've also always looked at it as, an ugly brick, the Minecraft gun. It's just the most uninspired aesthetically, and rightfully or wrongfully, aesthetics is always something that's mattered to me personally. So I never really gave it a lot of consideration as something that I would like to have. But we get older, and we also have a lot more experiences with a variety of firearms, and really see that maybe reliability isn't as commonplace in other platforms. So it just kind of brings me back to the identity of the Glock, which is boring reliability. But really the tipping point for me was every time I would go to the range and my buddies would bring their Glocks in, and they would actually kind of have trouble shooting it and maybe worry that there's something wrong with it. And then I would get it in my hands, and even though it's ugly, I don't really think it feels good in the hand. But then I would shoot it, and the most remarkable thing would happen. I'd have the best pistol groups I've had of any guns I've shot. And it just kind of blew my mind away, and it would happen every time I'd shoot a buddy's Glock. And it makes me realize that maybe something not being comfortable in the hand can still be an exceptionally good shooter. In fact, shoots better than the guns that feel more comfortable in the hand. And at a certain point, you just have to give in to the fact that you shoot it well. It's known for its exceptional dependability. Just pick one up already. So I didn't pick one up, I picked up two. But let's talk about another reason that maybe Glocks are just kind of a deal breaker for a lot of people historically. Frankly, I think the biggest reason isn't the aesthetics. I don't even think it's like people trying to just be special snowflakes. I admit I was trying to be a special snowflake going for something that's not a Glock. And I'm over that now. But the special snowflake aspect is real, but I think something that pushes people over that edge towards embracing the special snowflake aspect is the trigger. And historically, Glock triggers are very, I don't want to say bad, but leave a lot to be desired. I think they're a deal breaker historically. I mean, we have a Gen 2 Glock 17 right here. The trigger pull on this, mind you, it is not double action, it's a striker fired pistol, but the trigger pull weight is about 8 pounds, maybe 7.5, but it's rough. It's not too gritty or anything, and it has a nice wall to it, but it's very heavy to the point that it becomes a deal breaker. I'm not the biggest trigger snob in the world. I'm not a guy who says, it has to be the cleanest break and a 2-pound trigger, otherwise it's crap. I'm not that kind of guy. I think there's a certain degree or a certain threshold at which a trigger becomes sufficient. And what blew my mind when I first got the Gen 5 Glock in my hands was that I liked the trigger. I did not expect that from a factory Glock. And the trigger pull weight on the Gen 5 Glock, according to my testing, is in the ballpark of about 4 pounds. Sometimes it's lower towards 3.5, sometimes it's a little higher at 4.5, but average is around 4 pounds. That's really good, especially for a factory trigger out of the box that is gonna go bang every time. And that's the problem I've always had with the solution. People would say, oh, well, you don't like the trigger on the Glock, just replace it, upgrade it. And you know what, some of the time, that could be the answer. But I've just seen too many issues with aftermarket parts causing light primer strikes. And if not at the beginning, maybe they're 100% reliable at the beginning, but then after the service life, you break it in for a few thousand rounds, and suddenly you're gonna start getting light primer strikes. And you don't want that to happen, especially on a carry gun or a duty gun that you expect to go bang every single time. You know that if it's a stock Glock, it's probably gonna last tens of thousands of rounds, if not more. So that's a real point of how I was impressed by the Gen 5 when I first picked it up. Let's talk about the other things about the Gen 5 and why I think that this really makes the Glock the king again like unquestionably. Well, another big issue I had with the Gen 3 and Gen 4 Glocks was the finger grooves. Finger grooves are kind of cool in the sense that they allow you to really lock in the pistol if they fit your fingers well. The problem is we're all built a little different. I have pretty large hands, and I really did not like finger grooves on Glocks. That was a big reason I was never going to consider getting one. The Gen 5 goes back to the good old days of the Gen 1 and Gen 2 and remove the finger grooves. This allows for supreme intercompatibility depending on the shape of your hands and fingers. This allows anybody to lock in to the necessary degree and make good shot placements. I find that to be a huge uptick in the Glock's favor. And it's kind of returning to what their original form was. It's ironic that going back allowed Glock to go forward. Additionally, the MOS platform. Now, it's a little controversial to say this because the MOS is maybe not the most optimal solution compared to some other optic mounting platforms. However, the broad compatibility that it provides you right out of the box is impressive. We will see down the road if the plate starts to come loose. I have it Loctited in there, but as of right now, it's working great. I don't see any problem with stability. The best thing about the MOS plate system is you can literally pick up MOS plates off Amazon, of all places, for cheap, dirt cheap, and have it be compatible with whatever red dot you want to use. I've got a Trijicon RMR sitting atop this one, along with a Surefire X300 Turbo Light down below. Oh, and I have a Mariglow 429 suppressor height sights that sit just above the RMR, so you have kind of a lower 1/5, if you will, co-witness that allows you to have an unobstructed view of the red dot, but in the event that the red dot does die, you have backup iron sights to use. And I think that's a fantastic combination. But getting back to the point, I think the Gen 5 just kind of resolves most of the issues I had with Glocks. And I don't think this gets talked about a lot. I think when the Gen 5 came out, I think it was kind of lukewarm for a lot of people because, oh, it's just another Glock generation. It's just a Glock. And I don't think that's true. You know, going back to the trigger pull weight differences between a Gen 2 and a Gen 5, that's a big leap. That's 4 different generations to get there. But the Gen 4 already did improve the trigger a little bit. And then the Gen 5 improved upon the Gen 4's trigger significantly, in my opinion. But I think this is kind of a game changer. And I think the reason we always still continue to see Glock killer from these new pistols that maybe are compatible with Glock magazines, or they're just a generic striker-fired platform, whether it's the new Magpul Ruger collaboration on their Glock killer pistol that everyone wants to throw that around. Why do we call it a Glock killer? It's kind of like every time in the NFL that a team starts to look good, they say, oh, well, you know, this team's better than the Chiefs now, or this quarterback is better than Patrick Mahomes now. And the reality is we know the reason they say that is because of what the standard is. Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs in the NFL are the standard, the benchmark by which all others are compared. Glock, in the world of pistols, is the standard. It's the standard by which all other pistols are compared. Every other pistol, especially these so-called Glock killers, seem to focus on beating the Glock in 1 or 2 areas and focusing in on that, hoping that there's a market niche for people who want those particular improvements, even if the package as a whole isn't as compelling. I already talked about the RMR plates being readily available, easy to get, but that kind of speaks to the broader subject of where Glock dominates, and that's aftermarket support. And that's a little unfair because, you know, other pistols, especially new pistols, are trying to establish themselves with aftermarket support. But it's just also a fact that the aftermarket support is already there for Glock. I mean, any part you want, you can get. That being said, I do want to do a small rant about Gucci Glocks, or Glocks that are riddled with too many aftermarket parts. I think that that's something that maybe is harming Glock's reputation for reliability. And we've seen it on our own channel, in which we do Gucci modifications to Glocks to the point that they start to fail. And it causes issues, especially compensated barrels. it's a tricky thing. You're getting away from Glock OEM parts and getting into territories where maybe these manufacturers will test under certain conditions, but they don't work under all conditions. And that could be okay if you're really trying to do a competition pistol. I don't really think Glock is necessarily the best choice for a pure competition pistol. So in that sense, the only real compelling reason to build a Glock specifically for competition is because of your familiarity with the platform and your abundance of magazines that you probably have. You're probably better off doing a different platform for competition use only. And for a duty/carry gun, I probably wouldn't recommend using too many aftermarket components, if any. Once again, I think people got in the mindset of using aftermarket parts because triggers on Glocks used to be so bad, but now they're fine. I mean, is it the best striker fired trigger in the world that I've ever felt? No. But is there any issue with it? I mean, it breaks at a pretty reasonable weight. It's pretty crisp. The reset is fantastic, actually. And I just think it's good to go. I don't think it's worth doing aftermarket parts on a Gen 5 Glock. I think it's fantastic out of the box. In fact, the only upgrades that I'm planning on doing is using a Glock OEM threaded barrel because I have an Omega 9K that I want to be able to run with it from time to time. And my holsters support the threaded barrel. Now, on the subject of holsters, I do want to talk about the A&R design inside the waistband holster with the claw attachment, specifically with the claw, because that allows the grip of the gun to be held much more closely to your body. It tucks it in nice and snug to the point that concealment is achieved much greater. No printing. It's really good if you're trying to conceal a full-size pistol or anything with a longer grip. I think this is a fantastic holster. It takes a little while for them to make them because they're custom made. I mean, like a couple weeks max, but there's no other inside the waistband holster you should be getting than A&R design. Plain and simple. They are fantastic. Get one. I'm not sponsored by them. They should sponsor me, please. But A&R design holsters, fucking fantastic. Did I mention the Gen 5 also comes with a match barrel out of the box? I think that's pretty damn cool. Gives you better accuracy without compromising reliability. That's the problem I have with most match barrels. The fact that it's a Glock OEM match barrel that they put in every single Gen 5 Glock gives me confidence about its reliability. But even if it's not going to be the most accurate match barrel of all time, a little extra accuracy never hurt nobody, especially when it does not come at the cost of reliability. On the subject of aesthetics, because I've been a big critic of Glock aesthetics, like ever since I've been into guns. I'm starting to come around to it, the more I think about it. It's nothing fancy, but there's something kind of appealing, particularly when you build out a Glock with the light, especially specifically in RMR. I think the angular aesthetics of the RMR go well with the brick shape of the Glock. And I think it's kind of cool. It's cool in the same way I've also come around to thinking that Toyota Camrys are really cool. You get older and you start to appreciate the engineering of things just being reliable, and Toyotas suddenly become really cool, even if most people look at them and say, oh, that's really boring. But you just appreciate the ingenuity and the engineering behind it and what makes it run like nothing else, because it's gonna go forever. I also want to talk about maybe the path that kind of started to bring me around on Glock aesthetics. I think there's something to be said for Gen 1 and Gen 2 Glock 17s and Glock 19s, but especially, in this case, it's a Glock 17. I think there's something so pure about the stripped down classic Glock. And I think in a lot of ways, the lack of front slide serrations helps the look. I think that the lack of finger grooves helps the aesthetic come together. It's very simple, but you could argue its simplicity is the aesthetic purity. And I think that worked much better on the Gen 1 and Gen 2s than it does on the Gen 3 and Gen 4s. You know, these are things that are, you know, things that probably most people don't care about, but somebody who's into cars, somebody who's into guns, somebody who's into guitars, like, you know, there's part of me that's the engineer, and there's the part of me that's the artist. And the artist looks for things, and beauty doesn't come in the same form at all times, right? I think that this is beautiful in a different kind of way, but a way that I have grown to really appreciate. Now, the future pistols, I'm curious where Glock is gonna go. I think the number one thing the Gen 6 Glock needs to accomplish is moving towards a chassis system similar to the P320. That's a big leap, and I don't know, it might be too big of an ask for Glock. They may not want to go that route. But the reason I say this is because of the Flux Raider. The Flux is such a fantastic system for the P320 that doesn't really have a whole lot of applicability in the civilian world outside of maybe a truck gun, something like that. But I think has the opportunity to revolutionize law enforcement, allowing officers to get far more accurate shots on target at reasonable ranges. I think has some military applications. I've mostly been just talking about Glock 17s and 19s in terms of like the full size, if you will, Glock frames. Another thing that's cool about Glock is the Glock 20. I know there's the 21 also for 45 ACP, both of which have like class leading capacities for 10 millimeter and 45 ACP. I think that's really cool and compelling. Previously on this channel, we've done a review of shield mags for the Glock 43X and 48. That was a very controversial review. It's my fault because I did not do a good job explaining all the testing we had done behind the scenes prior to that review. We were using a Gucci Glock in that review for the video. So a lot of people said, oh, well, of course you're having issues with it. It's purely because it's a Gucci Glock and it's all those aftermarket parts, which I've railed on previously in this discussion. And that's not the case. I know it seems that case if you're just watching that video by itself. The reality is we tested on stock Glock 48, Glock 43X. We tested on, I think, 3 or 4 different Glock 43Xs in different configurations with the various, like 4 different mag releases. The recommended one's the OEM Glock mag release. And the reality is every single gun had issues with the shield magazines. Some, like at least one of the shield magazines could run most of the time, but all of them would have issues. That does not necessarily mean that everybody's gonna have issues with the shield magazines. In fact, we talked about it in the video, but I want to elaborate on it here. We believe that Glock intentionally changed very slightly, but changed the positioning and geometry of their mag release on the 43X, specifically to create issues with shield magazines. I don't think that's the case anymore. I don't think they're making future revisions to continue making issues, but we do believe that that was a real problem created by Glock themselves because they didn't want shield magazines to take over. Number one, they're not making money selling shield magazines. Number two, they were afraid to create market cannibalization between the 43X and 48 and the Glock 19, because why would you have a full-size Glock 19 that has 15 rounds when you can get a 43X that carries 15 rounds? I believe that's really stupid. I think the full-size grip on the 19 and the 17 is still very compelling just because of shooting ergonomics, that people would still buy Glock 19s and Glock 17s like crazy. In addition to the aftermarket support, of course. They probably should have just bought shield arms and embraced the shield magazine. But there's a big update to this, and something that I don't have test results for you yet, but we're going to be testing in the very near future, and that is Palmetto State Armory Dagger Micro magazines. Supposedly, they work really well with Glocks, 43X, 48, right out of the box, no modifications. I don't know if that's true yet, but I've heard great things. And if those work stock 43Xs, that is a game changer for the 43X. I had written off the platform after the Shield Arms video. If those magazines work in there, and because they're so cheap, like 30 bucks, that's such a low barrier of entry. We should all, like if that worked, we should all be running that. I mean, I'll be real with you. I love the SIG P365 platform. but a 43X with 15 round magazines, that's a lot more compelling to me than the SIG X Macro, because the SIG X Macro essentially has the same grip length as a Glock 17. And like at that point, I'm not saying you might as well carry a Glock 17, but like it's not that much harder for me to carry a Glock 17 than an X Macro. I actually prefer the regular 365 XL over the X Macro for that reason, because it's small enough or smaller enough compared to a Glock 17 that it's still worth carrying. But yeah, no, I'm really excited to test that out. I think that is going to be huge. Huge. You know, I don't have too many other thoughts, like just Glocks are cool, and I'm tired of pretending they're not. You know? They, for everyone who's still trying to kill the Glock and take down the Glock, it's still perfection. Thanks for watching, guys. You know, I know this is a bit of a longer form video. It's a little bit different format than I normally shoot. I think this is probably going to be a format more indicative of where I'm going forward at the channel, mixing in shooting and discussions, because I really want to get into the philosophical aspects of firearm usage. I hope you're looking forward to that content. I'm really looking forward to putting it out there. I know I haven't been the best about posting lately. A lot of it has to do with how YouTube has been messing with my channel, shadow banning it. I think the best way forward to fight the shadow banning is to just put content out there and push on through. And I think maybe we'll break through that barrier. Maybe when we get monetized someday, we will get more favorable treatment from YouTube. But please, please do me a big favor, like and subscribe if you can. Share this video or my other videos with your friends. It does a lot to help the channel. And I want to be a better content creator for you guys. I want to be a better content creator for the firearms community and contribute what I can to this great community. Thanks, guys. Brass Lab signing off. Take care.